The message came without warning. It flashed across every human communication relay, every military channel, and every screen orbiting the colonies. The alien symbol, a sharp black circle split by a crimson line, glowed with cold authority. Then came the voice. It was deep, echoing, and filled with hatred. You have expanded too far. You have taken what is not yours. You have angered the Krail Dominion. You want war, humans? The transmission ended with static, and silence filled the control room of the United Terran Defense Command. Officers looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or tremble. Humanity had faced enemies before, pirates, rebels, and even rogue AI, but the Krail were something else. They were an ancient empire known for burning entire species from the stars. General Elias Wren stood at the center of the room. His face was marked by age and battle scars, but his eyes held the same fire they did decades ago. "Transmit a response," he said quietly. The room went silent. The comms officer hesitated, unsure if the general meant what everyone was thinking. Elias turned to face the screen, his voice calm but heavy with fury. "You want war?" he said, his tone steady. "Then watch what happens when humanity stops forgiving." That message spread across every colony and every ship in the fleet. It wasn't just a declaration, and it was a promise. Humanity had been patient for too long, pushed back, insulted, and underestimated by alien powers. But this time they would not beg for peace. They would fight for survival and for vengeance. The war began on the edges of human space. Krail fleets, black and spiked like the claws of demons, descended upon small colonies and mining worlds. They slaughtered without mercy. Cities burned under plasma fire, and skies filled with falling debris. Millions died before Earth could even send reinforcements. On the colony of Tarsus Prime, a young engineer named Mara Valen watched her world fall apart. Her husband was a soldier, stationed on the outer defense line. She hadn't heard from him in days. When the first Krail cruiser appeared in the atmosphere, she ran to the shelter with her little daughter, Liana. But there was no safety. The ground shook, buildings collapsed, and flames painted the sky red. Mara whispered to her child, "Close your eyes, baby. Just hold me tight." She tried to be brave, but tears fell freely as explosions thundered above. Somewhere out there, in the cold void, humanity's fleets were gathering. Too late for Tarsus, but not too late for vengeance. Back on Earth, millions watched the reports come in. Entire families vanished. Entire planets lost contact. Fear began to spread, but with it, anger. The Krail thought they were teaching humanity fear, but they were awakening something far worse: unity. Factories roared to life. Shipyards burned through the night. For the first time in centuries, every human nation stood together. The fleet that rose from Earth's orbit was not the old fractured one of the past. It was something new, forged from loss and rage. General Elias watched from the command deck of the flagship Solar Wrath. Before him stretched the Armada, thousands of warships, their hulls gleaming under the sun. Every pilot, every marine, every engineer aboard those ships had lost someone. Every one of them wanted the same thing: justice. Elias looked at the photo taped beside his console, a picture of his son, who had died defending a Krail ambush 3 days before. His hands tightened into fists. "They wanted war," he whispered. "We'll give them one they'll never forget." The fleet began its jump to Krail space. Engines ignited, space warped, and light bent around the burning edge of humanity's fury. Across the galaxy, alien empires watched in silence, some in fear, others in disbelief. For centuries, humans had been called reckless, emotional, and fragile. But the galaxy had forgotten one truth: humanity's strength came from its heart. They could break, they could bleed, but they would always rise again. As the stars stretched into streaks of light and the fleet vanished into hyperspace, a single message pulsed through the void, broadcast across every known channel. You wanted war. Now watch your worlds burn. The stars looked cold and distant as the solar wrath emerged from hyperspace. Around it, hundreds of ships appeared, forming a silent storm in the void. Humanity had entered Krail space. The darkness ahead was filled with enemy worlds. Worlds that had once believed themselves untouchable. General Elias Wren stood tall on the command bridge. His eye studied the holographic map glowing before him. Red dots marked the enemy planets. Each one represented the screams of billions of humans. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. "Sir," said Commander Arya Chen beside him. Her voice was steady, but her face was pale. "Scouts report 3 Krail warfleets guarding the outer systems. They're waiting for us." Elias nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Let them wait." The order was given. The fleet advanced like a rising tide, formation after formation moving with deadly precision. On every ship, soldiers prepared for the fight ahead. Some prayed quietly. Some wrote final messages to families they would never see again. Others simply stared into the dark, their hearts burning with anger and pain. On board the Iron Dawn, Lieutenant Mara Valen sat in the engineering bay, her hands covered in grease and trembling from exhaustion. After Tarsus Prime fell, she had been rescued and drafted into the fleet. Her husband was gone, her home reduced to dust, but her spirit was still alive. She stared at the metal walls and whispered, "For you, Jalen, for everyone we lost." When the alarm sirens echoed, Mara ran to her station. The battle had begun. The first clash was brutal. The Krail warships were massive, spiked monsters with glowing red cores. Their plasma cannons tore through the void, lighting the darkness with deadly fire. Human ships answered with railguns, missiles, and beams of pure energy. The emptiness of space became a storm of destruction. The Iron Dawn shook violently as a plasma bolt scraped its shields. Sparks rained across the control room. "Shields down to 60%. Someone shouted. "Keep firing." Mara yelled, her voice raw. "Don't stop." From her console, she rerouted power, keeping the ship alive as explosions rippled outside. Every vibration through the hull felt like the cry of her fallen planet. Every flash reminded her of her daughter's frightened face. She could almost hear her child's voice. "Mommy, hold me tight." The memory cut through her chest. But it also gave her strength. Back on the solar wrath, General Elias watched as the Krail fleet began to falter. Humanity's rage was unstoppable. Every ship fought like it had nothing left to lose. "Target their flagships," he commanded. "Make them feel what they've done." 1,000 human warheads streaked across the stars. One by one, the Krail ships exploded into burning fragments, their red glow fading into the darkness. The space that had once belonged to the enemy now burned with the light of human vengeance. Commander Arya turned toward Elias, her voice shaking. "Sir, we're winning." Elias didn't smile. "No," he said quietly. "We're surviving." He knew this victory came with a cost. Thousands of human soldiers were gone already. Dozens of ships had vanished in the explosions. Every triumph carried ghosts. But they couldn't stop now. They were too far in, too deep in their pain to turn back. When the last Krail ship fell silent, the fleet regrouped near the shattered remains of a Krail moon. The silence that followed was haunting. No one cheered. No one spoke. The stars themselves seemed to watch in mourning. In her quarters, Mara sat alone. Her hands trembled as she held a small hologram, her husband and daughter smiling under a blue sky that no longer existed. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her expression was calm. "We did it," she whispered. "We're still here." She knew there would be more battles ahead. The Krail Empire stretched across 100 systems, and this was only the first strike. But something had changed inside her, inside all of them. They were no longer victims. They were humanity united by grief and fire. In the command deck of the Solar Wrath, Elias stared at the remains of the enemy fleet. His reflection shimmered in the glass, eyes hollow but burning with purpose. "Send a message," he said finally. The comms officer nodded. "What should I say, sir?" Elias turned slowly, his voice low but filled with a quiet storm. "Tell them humanity doesn't forget. Tell them this is only the beginning." Across the galaxy, the transmission spread. Alien worlds listened in silence, fear crawling through their empires. The humans had answered the Krail challenge, and not with surrender, but with fire. And as the fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, one truth echoed in every soldier's heart. Humanity had lost everything, and that made them unstoppable. The human fleet moved deeper into Krail territory, leaving behind a trail of smoke, wreckage, and silence. Every system they passed through was marked by revenge, destroyed outposts, shattered moons, and broken fleets. Yet even as they advanced, no one felt victory. The stars looked emptier with every mile. General Elias Wren stood before the great window of the solar wrath, watching the distant fires of the latest battle fade into the black sea of space. His uniform was stained with dust and ash. Around him, the command crew worked quietly, their voices low, their faces hollow. The war had changed them all. "Status report," Elias said softly. "Enemy forces retreating, sir," replied Commander Arya Chen. "But they're leaving traps behind. Mines, ambushes, decoys. They're desperate," Elias nodded slowly. "Desperation makes them dangerous." He looked at the glowing star chart, a vast map filled with red and blue lines. Humanity was winning, yes, but each victory came at the price of thousands of lives. On one of the fleet's medical ships, the Serenity Hope, the wounded filled every hallway. Doctors moved like ghosts, their faces hidden behind masks and exhaustion. Among them worked Mara Valen, now serving as a repair engineer for medical support systems. Her hands were steady as she fixed a damaged life support unit. But her heart ached every time she heard the screams. Soldiers crying for mothers, for children, for peace. It reminded her too much of Tarsus Prime. She glanced at a small holo photo stuck to her toolbox, her daughter's smile. The light flickered as if it, too, was tired. "I'm still fighting, baby," Mara whispered. "I'm still here." Suddenly, a deep tremor shook the ship. Red alarms flared. "All personnel to battle stations," shouted the intercom. "Krail counterattack incoming." Mara ran to the nearest console. Outside the viewports, dozens of Krail ships were emerging from hyperspace, a last furious attempt to stop the human fleet. In the solar wrath, Elias clenched his fists. "They're coming for the wounded," he said. "Monsters." "Sir, the Serenity Hope is unarmed," Arya warned. "They'll be slaughtered." Elias's eyes hardened. "Then we defend them with everything we have." The human fleet turned sharply, positioning themselves between the medical ships and the Krail attackers. The space between them lit up like a second sun as the two forces collided. Missiles streaked, plasma flared, and entire ships broke apart in blinding flashes. The solar wrath took heavy fire. Its shield screamed under the impact. "Forward batteries, fire," Elias commanded. "Hold the line!" For hours the battle raged. Human ships exploded one after another, but none retreated. Every captain knew what was at stake. The Krail wanted to break their spirit, but humanity had no spirit left to break. Only vengeance remained. Inside the Serenity Hope, chaos ruled. Explosions rocked the corridors. Mara held onto a wounded Marine as fire burst from the ceiling. She dragged him into safety, coughing, covered in smoke. "You're not dying today," she shouted. The Marine, bleeding and weak, looked up at her. "Why do we keep fighting?" he whispered. Mara paused. Through the broken window, she saw the human fleet, ships burning, exploding, yet still charging forward into the storm. Her voice trembled as she answered, "Because they started this. Because they took everything from us. And because we're human and we don't stop." Her words gave him strength. Together they crawled toward the emergency shelter as another blast shook the ship. When the battle finally ended, silence fell once again across the stars. The Krail fleet was gone, destroyed completely, but so were hundreds of human ships. The debris of both sides drifted together, glowing faintly under the dying light of a distant sun. On the bridge of the solar wrath, Arya reported, her voice cracking. We lost 32 ships, sir. Over 20,000 lives. Elias closed his eyes. And the wounded? The Serenity Hope is safe. Thanks to the Iron Dawn and Vigilant Star. They took the fire meant for her. Elias bowed his head. The victory tasted like ashes. Transmit a message, he said quietly. Arya hesitated. What message, sir? Elias turned slowly toward her. His eyes burned like dying stars. Tell the Krail this is the price of their arrogance. Tell them we're coming for their homeworld next. Later that night, Mara stood by the ship's window looking out at the field of drifting wreckage. It was beautiful and terrible at once. The remains of heroes floating among stars. She whispered to herself, how many more until it ends? But deep down she already knew the answer. It would not end until there was nothing left to destroy. As the fleet prepared to move again, Elias stared at the holographic projection of the Krail homeworld, a massive planet surrounded by defense rings and moons. His reflection flickered across the glowing map. Tomorrow, he said softly, we burn their skies. And with that, the solar wrath led the fleet once more into the cold black, where vengeance and sorrow had become the same thing. Humanity's heart was bleeding, but its fire still burned brighter than ever. The war was no longer just survival, it was personal. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in the shadow of the Krail homeworld. The planet was enormous, covered in black storms and shining metal, continents that glowed with fire and lightning. Around it spun hundreds of war stations, defense rings, and fleets waiting like predators. It was the heart of the enemy, the place where the war had begun, and where it would finally end. On the bridge of the Solar Wrath, General Elias Wren stood in silence. The entire command crew stared at the view before them. The Krail homeworld looked like a living nightmare, beautiful, powerful, and cruel. Commander Arya Chen whispered, That's it. The Krail Prime. Elias nodded slowly. His eyes were dark, filled with exhaustion and fury. All ships prepare for full assault. No holding back. His words spread across every human vessel. Pilots tightened their gloves. Soldiers kissed pictures of their loved ones, and engineers whispered quiet prayers. There was no going back now. The war that began with pain would end with fire. In the engineering bay of the Iron Dawn, Mara Valen watched the planet appear on the holographic screen. Her heart pounded in her chest. It was strange. After all the destruction, all the blood, she did not feel hatred anymore, only emptiness. She touched the small hollow of her daughter and whispered, I'm almost done, baby. Just one last fight. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to stand tall. Around her, the crew prepared for the worst. Every vibration of the ship, every flicker of the lights reminded her that death could come at any second. Yet she kept working, fixing the power lines, stabilizing the reactor. Humanity was counting on people like her, the ones behind the fire. The Krail fleet began to move. Thousands of black warships rose from the planet's orbit like a swarm of shadows. Their message echoed across the stars. You came to die, humans. Your courage will be your end. Elias stood firm on the bridge. His voice was steady as he answered, Maybe, but if we die, you'll die with us. With that, humanity attacked. The sky above the Krail homeworld turned into pure chaos. Human and Krail ships collided in a storm of explosions and light. Missiles streaked across the blackness, beams of plasma cut through space, and the sound of war echoed like thunder through the void. The Solar Wrath fired its main cannon, a beam of white energy so bright it blinded the sensors. It tore through two Krail cruisers and struck one of their defense rings, breaking it apart like glass. Direct hit, Arya shouted. Defense ring Alpha destroyed! But the Krail answered with fury. Their planetary cannons fired from the surface, sending massive plasma bolts upward. One hit the Vigilant Star, a human battleship beside them. The explosion lit the darkness with a terrible flash. The ship was gone in an instant. Thousands of souls erased. Elias clenched his fists but didn't look away. For every one we lose, he whispered, we take 10 of theirs. Down below, the Krail homeworld burned. Human drop pods fell through the storm clouds carrying marines and heavy armor. The surface was a wasteland of fire and ash. The Krail fought fiercely, but the humans fought harder. Every soldier carried memories of lost families, lost worlds, lost love. Among them, Mara's husband's name echoed again in her heart. She had lost him, but his spirit felt alive in every human scream of defiance. Every explosion, every step forward was his vengeance. As Mara repaired a broken power core, a young soldier beside her asked, "Do you think we'll win?" She looked at him, her eyes shining with tired fire. "We already did," she said softly. "Because we didn't give up." Hours passed. The battle seemed endless. The Krail homeworld sky turned red and black as both sides bled across the stars. The air was filled with the light of burning ships and dying suns. Inside the solar wrath, alarms blared. "Shields failing," Arya shouted. "We've lost engines." Elias gritted his teeth. "Reroute power to the forward guns. If this is our last stand, then we make it count." The solar wrath charged its final shot. Its reactor glowed white-hot, shaking the entire ship. "Fire!" Elias commanded. The beam struck the planet's surface, piercing its atmosphere and hitting the central Krail command citadel, the heart of their empire. A massive explosion erupted, visible even from orbit. The Krail defenses collapsed in seconds. Their fleets fell into disarray, their communications broke apart, and their courage died with their home. Humanity had done it. They had burned the world that had started the war, but victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavy. Lonely. Mara watched from her window as the Krail planet burned. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Oceans of flame spreading across continents. She should have felt joy, but instead she felt tears. "This won't bring them back," she whispered. "It never will." On the bridge, Elias heard the same silence in his heart. Around him, the crew stared at the burning world, unsure whether to cheer or cry. Arya finally spoke in a broken voice. "Sir, we won." Elias didn't answer for a long moment. His reflection shimmered in the dying light of the Krail planet. Then he said quietly, "No one wins in war, Commander. Some just lose more slowly." The fleet drifted away from the burning world. Behind them, Krail Prime crumbled under its own flames. Ahead of them lay the endless dark, and the ghosts of everyone they'd lost. Humanity had answered the challenge. They had survived, but at a cost beyond measure. The galaxy would remember this day forever. The day humans replied, "You want war? Then watch your worlds burn to ashes." The war was over. Krail Prime was gone, a burning wound in the galaxy. The once proud empire of the Krail had fallen silent. What was once their home was now nothing but dust, fire, and broken stone drifting through the black. But peace did not come with victory. It never did. The human fleet floated above the ashes of a dead world. Ships that had once roared with anger now drifted quietly, their lights dim, their crews hollow. There were no cheers, no celebrations, only silence, heavy and endless. General Elias Wren stood alone on the observation deck of the Solar Wrath. Below him, the dying planet glowed faintly, like a candle flickering before it vanished. The sight that once would have brought satisfaction now only brought sorrow. He had won. Humanity had won, but he felt no pride and only loss. Commander Arya Chen entered quietly. Her uniform was torn, her face pale, but her eyes still held that same fierce loyalty. She stood beside him, staring at the burning planet. "They're gone," she said softly. Elias nodded. "All of them. Then why does it feel like we lost?" He didn't answer at first. He just watched the drifting clouds of ash. Finally he said, "Because we became what they were." On the Iron Dawn, Mara Valen sat alone in the engineering bay. The battle was finished, but her heart wasn't at peace. The air smelled of burnt metal and oil. The ship's hum felt louder than before, as if the silence around her had weight. She looked at the small hollow of her daughter again. The child's smile felt like a ghost, something from a dream that would never return. "It's over," Mara whispered, her voice trembling. It's finally over. But even as she said it, tears ran down her cheeks. Her hands shook as she turned off the holo and pressed her forehead against the cold wall. She had fought so long, lost so much, and yet the victory tasted like ashes. When her crewmates passed by, they smiled weakly, but their eyes were empty too. Everyone was alive, but no one was truly living. Hours later, a transmission crackled through the fleet's channel. It was faint, distorted, coming from the surface of the ruined world. "Sir," said the comms officer on the Solar Wrath, "we're receiving something." "From Krail Prime," Elias turned sharply. "That's impossible. The planet's gone. It's weak, but it's there. Play it." The speakers hissed for a moment, then a voice echoed. Broken, weak, but clear enough to freeze every human on board. "Humans, if you hear this, know that you have won, but you have not destroyed us. You have only repeated our mistake." The voice belonged to a Krail elder recorded before their fall. "We too once burned the worlds of others. We too believed victory meant power, and it destroyed us from within. We see now that your fire will do the same. You will carry our curse." The message ended in static. For a long time, no one spoke. The entire bridge was silent. Even the hum of the ship seemed to fade away. Elias stared at the comm screen. He could still hear the echo of that voice in his mind. "Our curse," he whispered. Maybe they're right. Later, as the fleet prepared to leave Krail space, a memorial was held. On every ship, soldiers gathered to honor the fallen, both human and alien. No speeches were made. No music played. Only quiet lights floated through space, thousands of glowing beacons released into the void, drifting slowly between the stars. Mara stood among the crowd on the Iron Dawn's deck. Her eyes followed the lights, each one representing a soul lost in the war. She placed her hand on her chest and whispered, "For you, Jalen. For everyone." Beside her, a young pilot whispered, "Do you think they'll forgive us?" Mara looked up at the endless dark sky. "I don't know," she said softly. "But maybe. We can forgive ourselves one day." On the bridge of the Solar Wrath, Elias watched the memorial lights fade. His ship had lost more crew than any other. He could still remember their faces, laughing, talking, dreaming. Now they were part of the stars. Arya stood beside him. "Where do we go now, sir?" Elias looked out at the galaxy, endless, cold, and beautiful. "Home," he said after a moment, "if we can still call it that." As the fleet began its slow journey back to human space, Elias sent out one final transmission to every ship. His voice was quiet, but it carried through every speaker. "We have won the war. But victory is not peace, remember. What we've done here, remember what it cost. Let this be the last time humanity answers hate with fire." The message spread through the fleet, like a whisper through a graveyard. As the stars stretched before them, humanity moved forward, scarred, tired, but alive. Behind them lay the ruins of their enemy. Ahead of them lay a galaxy that would never see them the same way again. For the first time in centuries, the universe feared humanity, but humanity feared itself even more. And in the deep silence of space, where the echoes of war still lingered, one truth remained unbroken. They had won the war, but they had lost a part of their soul. The journey back to human space was long and quiet. The fleet moved through the dark like a ghost, its ships scarred and silent. Every hull carried the black marks of battle, and every crew carried invisible wounds. They had won the war, but no one felt like a victor. When Earth finally came into view, blue and bright against the darkness, some wept. Others simply stared in silence. Home. The word felt strange now, distant. They had left as defenders, but they were returning as destroyers. General Elias Wren stood on the command deck of the Solar Wrath, watching the image of Earth grow larger on the main screen. The sight should have filled him with relief. Instead, it filled him with unease. "Transmit message to Earth Command," he ordered quietly. "Inform them. The war is over. The comms officer nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, sir. Moments later, Earth's response came, a chorus of cheers and celebration. The whole planet was rejoicing. Cities lit up, fireworks flashed in the skies, and people sang in the streets. Humanity's victory had reached home before the fleet had. But on the solar wrath there was no cheering, no music, only silence. Commander Arya Chen looked at the glowing screen showing Earth's celebrations and shook her head. They don't know, she said softly. They have no idea what it cost. Elias sighed deeply. And maybe they never should. On the Iron Dawn, Mara Valen walked down the corridor, her hands brushing the walls as if to remind herself she was still alive. The war had ended, but the sound of explosions still echoed in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fire, burning cities, falling ships, her daughter's frightened face. When the fleet entered Earth's orbit, she looked out the viewport. The planet was beautiful, clouds swirling softly, oceans shining like glass. She pressed her hand against the window. Home, she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. But even home felt like a memory she no longer belonged to. A week later, the fleet landed. Heroes' parades were planned. Medals were prepared. The government called it humanity's great victory, but many soldiers refused to attend the celebrations. They didn't want to be called heroes. They just wanted silence. Elias stood before a massive crowd at the United Terran Command Center. Cameras were everywhere. The people were shouting his name. He was supposed to speak and to give them words of pride, of triumph. But when he looked at the sea of smiling faces, he felt his heart sink. They didn't see the dead. They didn't see the burned worlds or the children lost in the fire. They only saw glory. He stepped to the microphone. His voice was calm, but his eyes were tired. We have survived, he said. But survival is not victory. We fought because we had no choice, and we won because we refused to fall. But the war has changed us. It took from us things we can never replace. The crowd grew silent. His words cut through the noise like a blade. Do not celebrate the ashes of our enemies, Elias continued. Mourn the fire that burned inside us to make it happen. Remember those who never came home and pray that we never have to fight like this again. He stepped back. No music followed, no applause. The silence was heavier than any roar. Later that night, Elias sat alone in his quarters. He took out the small photo of his son, the same one that had stayed beside him through every battle. His fingers brushed the edges gently. I did what I had to, he whispered, but I wonder if you'd still be proud of me. The question lingered in the air unanswered. Meanwhile, Mara was back on Earth, standing in the ruins of her old home. The colony of Tarsus Prime was gone, but the government had relocated the survivors. Still, nothing could replace what she'd lost. She stood in a small field under a quiet sky, holding a new memorial chip, her daughter's name engraved in light. She knelt, placing the chip on the grass. You can rest now, she said softly. It's over. But deep down she knew peace would never truly come. Not to her, not to any of them. They had seen too much. A small child ran past her, laughing, playing, chasing butterflies. Mara smiled faintly, though her eyes filled with tears. Grow up better than us, she whispered. Don't inherit our hate. Across the world, people celebrated, but whispers began to spread. Some questioned if the destruction of the Krail homeworld had been necessary. Some called it justice. Others called it genocide. For the first time, humanity looked in the mirror and didn't like what it saw. In the quiet halls of the solar wrath, now turned into a museum of remembrance, Elias walked alone. He stopped before a plaque engraved with thousands of names, soldiers, engineers, medics, and civilians. He placed his hand on the cold metal. Forgive us, he murmured. Arya approached, standing beside him. What now, sir? Elias looked up at the stars through the large glass window. Now, he said softly, now we learn to live again. As night covered Earth, the stars shone brighter than ever, silent witnesses to humanity's triumph and its tragedy. The galaxy had changed forever. The humans had proved their strength, but also their sorrow, and somewhere in the dark between worlds, the echo of that old alien voice still lingered, warning, whispering, "You have won, but you carry our curse." The years after the war were quiet, almost painfully so. The great fleets that once filled the void now rested in orbit, silent like tombstones of metal. The skies that once burned with fire now shimmered with peace. But that peace carried a strange weight, the kind that pressed against the soul instead of lifting it. General Elias Wren had retired. He lived in a small cabin by the sea, far away from the noise of the cities. The world called him a hero, but he no longer believed in that word. Every night he would sit by the shore, watching the waves crash softly against the rocks. The sea reminded him of space, endless, deep, and full of ghosts. Sometimes he would still hear the voice of his crew in the wind, the laughter, the fear, the final goodbyes. He would close his eyes and whisper their names one by one, afraid that forgetting them would mean the war had truly won. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, a transport ship landed near his cabin. The ramp lowered and a familiar figure stepped out, Mara Valen. She looked older, tired, but there was a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She approached him with a faint smile. "I thought I'd find you here," she said softly. Elias gave a small nod. "Didn't think anyone remembered this place." "People remember you," Mara replied. "Even if you don't want them to." He gave a short laugh, quiet, almost bitter. "Remembering is easy. Living with memories. That's the hard part." Mara sat beside him on the wooden step facing the sea. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sound of the waves filled the silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried understanding. Finally, Mara spoke. "I've been helping rebuild the colonies," she said. "Children who lost their families, soldiers who can't sleep. They need someone to talk to." Elias turned to look at her. "That's good," he said. "You always had strength in you, even when everything burned," Mara smiled sadly. "I didn't have strength, Elias, I just didn't have a choice." They both looked toward the horizon where the ocean met the sky. For the first time in a long while, the sunrise didn't look like fire. It looked like hope. Across the earth, the scars of war slowly faded. Cities rebuilt. The great craters left by orbital bombardments were turned into memorial lakes. People planted trees where ashes had fallen. Humanity was learning again, not how to fight, but how to feel. Children grew up hearing stories of the war. Teachers told them about courage, sacrifice, and unity, but also about anger, pride, and loss. They learned that humanity's greatest victory was not the destruction of its enemies, but the strength to rebuild what was broken. The United Terran Council formed the Remembrance Fleet, not for war, but for peacekeeping. Their ships carried supplies, not weapons. Their mission was to help other species to heal what the galaxy had lost to hatred. Elias was invited to speak at the dedication ceremony. At first he refused, but Mara convinced him. "You don't have to be a soldier again," she said gently. "Just a man who remembers," so he went. He stood before the great silver ship named Hope's Dawn, surrounded by young cadets, bright-eyed, full of dreams. He looked at them and said in a quiet, steady voice, "We once answered war with fire. We turned worlds to ash, but the greatest answer humanity can give is not revenge and it's mercy. We fought because we had to. Now we build because we choose to." The cadets stood in silence, hanging on every word. Elias smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and peace. Later that evening, Elias and Mara stood together beneath the stars. Above them, the Hope's Dawn began its first voyage, its engines glowing softly like lanterns in the dark. Mara looked up. "Do you think the galaxy will ever forgive us?" she asked quietly. Elias thought for a moment. "Maybe not," he said. But maybe it doesn't have to. Forgiveness isn't something we wait for. It's something we earn. The wind brushed gently against them, carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. Mara looked at him, her voice trembling. Do you ever wish it had gone differently? Elias stared at the stars, those endless points of light that had witnessed everything. Every day, he said. But wishing doesn't change what we did. What matters now is what we become. That night, as the world slept, the stars above Earth shimmered brighter than they had in years. The galaxy was watching the species that had once burned it in rage, now trying to heal it with hope. In the quiet of his cabin, Elias wrote one final message in his old war log before sealing it away forever. To whoever reads this, remember us not for the fire we unleashed, but for the light we tried to bring back after the fire died. We were flawed, we were fearful, but we were human, and that in the end was enough. He closed the book and placed it beside the window where the first rays of dawn touched its cover. Outside, the waves kept moving, endless, steady, alive. And for the first time since the war ended, Elias Wren smiled without pain.